favorite time of the day. We are going back into policy now. We have our final policy. Our final policy to be considered at the meeting is recommended draft policy 2017-5, which is improved IPv6 registration requirements. So, because it's a recommended policy, I have to say a few things. One is that it could become ARIN policy sometime after this meeting before we all see you again. So if the AC recommends that it be moved to last call, that would happen after this meeting. Once it goes through last call, any comments from the community, the AC could then send it to the board for adoption. So this is policy that you're literally getting your last chance at in a face-to-face meeting, potentially. The AC could also decide it's not ready and bring it to the next ARIN meeting. But it's a pretty important thing to recognize. Recommended draft policies are different than draft policies. They are potentially policies going into the number resource manual. Okay, I'm going to give a staff introduction to this so you have the full history. It was proposed in 2017. It was ARIN Policy Proposal 240. The AC Shepherds are Leif Sawyer and Chris Tassett. Hey, I got Chris down there. Has not been presented at any prior meeting. Advanced to recommended draft status last month, and earlier this month actually in September, or last month in September. It is in your discussion guide and online. So some relevant things. It will change the registration, the requirements for IPv6 registration from /64 or more addresses to /47 or more addresses, or subdelegation of any size that will be individually announced. So this changes what has to show up for purposes of registering subdelegations. It corrects a pointer that's in the text that's incorrect, and it adds a new requirement stating that a downstream recipient of /64 or more may request the publishing of their reassignment information from their upstream provider, and the upstream provider must publish the information upon request of their customer. Staff comments. The language is fairly straightforward. We can implement it. The change to the pointer is straightforward. There is a question about the language. Shall, must, should. If it says should publish, then that's good advice for the ISP, but it's not something that we necessarily would be enforcing. It's strong advice. If it says must publish or shall publish, then it's a concrete policy. And it's a term that, in theory, an ISP who ignored, if we were to receive reports of that, would end up with me having a discussion about their ISP, along with Michael, about their contractual compliance to the policy. So that's a pretty important distinction. Saying something is must or shall is means that this is potentially upon the risk of having the rights to the resource. And this has been addressed in these bullets have been addressed in the 18 September revision. Legal assessment, no material legal issues regarding the proposal, minimal impact. We'd have to update our guidelines and our internal procedures, obviously. We'd have to do staff training to roll this out. Now I will turn it over to Leif. How can I get it right, wrong? Geez. One more time. How do I say this? Show me the secret.
So it says Leif Sawyer, right?
Yep.
Whip your flirts around and think safe lawyer.
I'm incapable of saying those words. Your presentation. Green.
It's all fun and games until somebody loses an eye. Big green button that says forward. Okay, good morning. So as John mentioned, we have a problem statement that was brought up by the original author, Albert, which is to help improve directory registration requirements. There was a perception that it was an onerous task on the part of companies, ISPs, LIRs, whatever you would like, that submitting registration updates for every single /64 was tedious, and a lot more tedious than what IPv4 looked like, and that seemed unfair to him. So we had this submitted out. And it seems like a good idea. How do we get this to be in balance, right? How do we make things seem fair between IPv4 and IPv6? And we went back and forth on this policy. We tried to figure out where that line was. 62, 61, you have 3 bits in IPv4, 3 bits in IPv6. This seems kind of weird. And finally, we came up that /48 seems to be the standard for deploying to end user sites. Okay, well, maybe that's the right boundary. Well, that's where we landed on. And we'll get a little further into that in the next slides. Also, we pointed out that there were some typos in the NERPM based on cut and paste from older policy, and that is being corrected. So if this does advance, this will reduce workload for, I guess, both ARIN staff and for you, the community out there. You won't have to send in your updates for every single /64, and that might be a good thing. I'm personally, everything for me is automated, so I don't know. There might be people out there still doing it manually. But this seemed to get a lot of positive uptake from the community. So that's what we did. We went forward, changed the section 6554 for registrations requested due to wanting to make sure we're filling in the hole that we removed by migrating to the /48, fixing the text. And here, after the cleanup, is what the policy looks like. It's also in your discussion guide starting on page 11. And on page 12, you'll see the staff and legal in case you wanted to look back at that. So as John said, this is a recommended draft policy. And if that's what the community wants, we can move this forward and cleaning up the text in the NERPM and making things easier on our community, I think is what we're all about up here. So we want to talk about that, find out if you are in support of this goal. We want to find out the shall versus should. Is that an important issue to discuss and solve here at this meeting before we try and advance this? So I guess with that, Paul, we might open this up to comments.
Oh, you left me thinking.
Thank you, Leif.
He's just more nervous now because he's just learned that that's also my middle name. So now he's determined he has to learn how to practice.
And you pronounce it differently than him.
Yes, I do, just to throw him off completely. And with that little trivia, we will open the microphones. As a reminder, we are taking both remote participation and microphone. This may be the last time you have a chance in a setting like this to comment, so it is crucial that you approach a microphone if you have a comment to make, even if it's just to say, I support or I'm against, and we will start that with the center microphone.
Jason Schiller, Google, ASOAC. I support the policy with shall. I also support the policy with a fallback to should if that's what's required to push it through in this cycle. I am the originator of this should-shall problem by suggesting the word must. That ISPs must SWIP address space to their reassignments if their downstream customer has an org and requests such, because they have tech contacts and abuse contacts and want those to be honored and used. My concern with the policy is we've basically engineered IPv6 in such a way that ISPs never have to SWIP unless they fall into this bucket of, I have a downstream customer that's an ISP, or I have a downstream customer that's going to multi-home. And if I am the type of ISP that doesn't have ISP customers and doesn't allow BGP multi-homing, I can safely ignore all IPv6 SWIP requirements. And that's not good for the community, and that's not what this policy is trying to do. Unfortunately, if the word is should and not shall, it makes it optional. And I can in good faith stand up and say, I am doing the minimum that is required under ARIN policy, no harm, no foul. And I really don't believe that that's what the intention of this policy was. So what I am asking today is, can we sort out shall and should here in this room and move this policy forward? And can we do it in a way that's positive? Can we not make it shall versus should? Because that's going to split the community, and that's going to drive this further down the time horizon, and we're not going to have a policy change. If the community is generally in support of fixing SWIP requirements, then let's have the right word there, and let's figure out today what the right word is. So I would ask everyone who supports shall to come to the mic and tell me that they support shall, and if they would also support a fallback to should, if that's what's required to get this policy through in this cycle.
Okay.
I'd also like to hear the inverse, people that support should, but not shall. We haven't seen any of that on the mailing list. Presumably, there might be some. So if we don't call a specific question about do you support it with should with a fallback, do you support it with should but not shall, or do you support it with shall and a fallback to should? If we don't call that question, the only way that we can find out that answer is by people coming to the mic and telling us. So please come to the mic and tell us.
So before you run away, so to clarify a bit, so the question that will be called, and there will be a question that you will be able to raise your hand at the end of this process, will be on, do you support the policy as written, and that is the should. So if you, when you do approach the microphone, if you are saying you're supporting the policy, you're supporting it with the should. However, we are quite happy if you, as are on the mic, that if you would wanted to comment on, you would support it with shall. That won't be the question per se, but it would obviously be the input to the advisory council as they deliberate. So just to try and keep the process clean on how we'll do this. So my understanding is
I understand the desire to keep the process clean. I've specifically asked for a different question to be called.
Okay.
I understand that's not going to happen.
I understand. So to clarify, you are against the policy, but you would support it if the word was shall.
I don't think it's worth sabotaging this policy and pushing it to the next cycle. I think it's a good change. I think we should move it forward. I think we should move it forward with shall, but I am not willing to throw away the change just to get shall.
Thank you. Microphone over here.
Matt PTAC, Yahoo. I note that the current wording in 6551 uses shall. We've been working with shall for quite some time, and people haven't been raising pitchforks and storming the gates. I support the policy. I support the policy whether it's shall or should, but I would like to note that for people who are concerned about the strength of should versus shall or shall versus should, we haven't had people jumping up and down about the fact that it's shall today. So I would love to see it be shall, but if it needs to be should, as Jason said, I'll support it either way.
Thank you. Remote participant. Oh, sorry, Dan Alexander first.
Dan Alexander, RNAC. I think one aspect of this while we're talking about should and shall is if everybody is in favor of this shall, there is a follow-up question to that as to what the community expects ARIN staff to do when that's not happening. So there is a slightly further context to changing it to shall, which does change the scope of this proposal.
Okay, John Curran.
For all practical purposes, shall is a mandatory requirement. It's equivalent to must. It is what it presently says for the text. We have not, to my knowledge, actually I can say definitively, we have not had complaints about compliance with this. We would act on those complaints. We literally would approach you and say, we're receiving complaints, you're not complying with the policy you requested under. Were you lying to us then, or you're lying to us now, and what is the resolution of this? If you put this in as shall, just recognize it's something you all have to expect to honor. It's that simple. If you put it in as should, then you're still expected to honor it, but you'll probably never hear from ARIN about compliance because it's should. It truly is guidance, not an obligation. A policy obligation would be something that says shall or must.
Thank you. Center microphone, please.
Owen DeLong, Akamai, RNAC. Pretty much what Jason said. I support the policy as written. I would prefer to see it as shall. And in terms of the follow-on question that Dan asked, what would we expect ARIN staff to do? Well, I would expect them to do what they've been doing with shall in the existing policy. And I think that's worked out fine, and I think we can trust staff to continue doing what they're doing just fine, and I don't see the big deal about a one-word change to this policy. I think we can make that in the process of sending it to last call, and that we should do that. So, or
Okay.
that we shall
You-
do that,
you shall,
maybe.
You shall do that, should you decide to. Microphone over here, please.
Like everyone else who has spoken, I support shall because
I'm
should-
sorry, I have to stop you. Your name
I'm
and
Bill
organization.
Woodcock. Because having a lot of shoulds in there is pointless and wastes all of our time. There is no reason to do advisory policies that are non-binding. It takes space and time and
Words.
words. Yes, let's just do shall.
Thank you for that comment. Far microphone.
Kevin Bloomberg, I support.
That's not the far microphone.
Oh, sorry. It's Billy
See,
Hyatt.
you've all figured the trick out that I don't actually see which order. I'm too old to remember, so I just keep going around.
Back and
So
forth.
if you want to get talk sooner, find a shorter line. Far microphone.
Billy Hyatt, Ozarks Go. I'm a tiny ISP, probably the smallest one here. I support this policy and I support shall.
You support shall. Thank you. Middle microphone.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. I support the policy as written. I want to get this ahead. But I had a question.
I
In-
apologize. No, sorry. Go ahead.
John, under the RSA, and this has been a concern back and forth on a number of policies over time, where RSA trumps policy, and I understand policy is guidance towards the RSA as well. In good faith, I get space from ARIN. In good faith, this policy is shall. Okay, so we're both in good faith. And the market changes, and a whole bunch of users start coming to me and asking me to swip their 64s for whatever silly reason. It's needed by some online gaming system now, so they can track whatever. And we're not automated. We're a smaller company, and it's a lot of work. In the should environment, I can say, no problem. We're going to charge you a small fee, and if you're happy paying that fee, we'll make the change for you. In the shall environment, if I say it's going to be a small fee and they go, well, I'm going to ARIN because you shall do this. It's a requirement. What happens in that scenario, and what happens in the scenario where I just say I'm not doing it at all, but I got the space in good faith in the first place from the RSA?
John would like to respond.
Very simple. This is actually an excellent question. So generally what we would end up doing, we'd have a conversation. You'd explain, look, this is available. It's a fee, but I do it, okay? And we would say, oh, okay. And we'd say, that's fine. And then John Sweeting would come to the next meeting in a policy experience report and say, we get complaints about this, and we go and ask, and people say it's available for a fee, and they're more than willing to put the route in for the SWIP of the 64, and it's our understanding this is what the community likes. So we would generally take the most favorable interpretation to you, because the alternative is for us to take a less than favorable interpretation and me to embark on a legal adventure, which I like to avoid at all circumstances. So we would end up reporting back to the community that this is our understanding, and we're going along with this as the interpretation. If you didn't like it, you could say more explicit policy, but that would be up to this team. Now, same conversation, that last sentence you just said. What if we just say, no, we're not doing this, we're not complying with this policy, and it says shall? We'd have a conversation, I'd follow it up with another conversation, I'd ask to talk to your executives, and then you'd get a notice of noncompliance. You can go look at what your RSA says. The path that would be leading you down would be a path where we would turn around and say, we are going to remove your number of resources, and you would have an appeal process.
For fraud?
For violation of the RSA.
That's what I'm asking. So
obligates you-
historically, we've heard for fraud, for non-payment.
Your RSA obligates you to comply with the policies in NERPM.
Thank you.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
at this point, I support it as written. I'm indifferent to shall. What I am not indifferent to is this policy being stalled for any reason because of a change that may not be considered editorial or may create issues. That's my issue right now.
Well, for clarity, Dan, and I'm tempted to answer, but what are the options for the AC at this point, should they want to change that text? Are you able to do that without coming back? I believe so, but I'm not. It's been a few years now, so.
Well,
I forget the
It's
intricacies
something
of
I
that
have
little
to-
section.
it's something I need to talk to John about as to how comfortable staff is, because it specifically calls this out in the staff and legal. that it's a different scope. So,
I apologize. We apparently have queued up a few remote participants. How many do we have?
We have 2 comments in queue.
Okay, let's get the address both of them. So, but just one at a time first. So,
Okay. First comment in queue is from Marla Eisinger. The comment reads, I oppose this policy. /64 is the common V6 allocation handed out in place of what would be a V4/29 or larger due to the number of addresses available in V6. Records need to be public. Entering a SWIP of some kind, be it R-Who-Is, which I recommend, or other, is far easier than the work that goes into creating and processing subpoenas. Marla made a second comment to the should-shall question, which is the word is must. That's comment number 1.
okay, let's have the other one then.
Comment number 2 is from Christoph Blecker at the Walt Disney Company. His comment reads, I support this policy. I would support it more strongly and would prefer it with shall, but I would also be okay with should as written if that's what's needed to push it forward. And the third comment just came in.
Sure, please.
May I read it?
Yeah.
Andy Hadenfeld from Allo Communications. I support this proposal. I prefer it with shall, but would be willing to support should.
Thank you. So I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock. We want to make sure we get all the input, but from a time management perspective, I would appreciate if you do plan to speak to line up, just so I have some sense of how much time we need to allocate. And we are over at this microphone right now.
Rudy Daniel, Caribbean. I support the policy as written, and I would prefer shall. And I would prefer that we give some consensus to the AC to progress it as shall from this meet.
Thank you. Far microphone.
Hi, Sean Stewart, speaking only as myself. I support it, strongly preferring shall or must, but accepting should if it needs to pass. As far as fees for non-standard services from an ISP to a small customer, they're same as with a single static IPv4 address. If it's not standard part of the process, charge me a fee.
Okay. Thank you. I would just ask all the remaining speakers if you could try and be as succinct as possible and not try and raise too many additional points. Thank you. Center microphone.
Andrew Dole, CrowdStrike. I support the policy with shall. I also support it with should. I would prefer shall. Unfortunately, I just realized that the V6 policy regarding reassignment or reallocation records actually doesn't use the word reallocation anywhere. So this policy would seem to apply, given where it is in the NERPM, to both reassignments and reallocations. And I think reallocation should always be shalls. So therefore, I also like that this would be shall as well.
Thank you.
Austin Merklin, QSyn Technologies. I support the policy as written with a preference towards shall.
Okay, thank you for that. Over back here.
Sure. Provo, Google, ARIN AC, occasional consultant, and speaking with personal hat. I supported this with must. I'll support it with shall. And if we absolutely have to fall back to should, then okay.
Thank you. Remote participant, just one of them for now, please.
Not a remote. I'm making my own comment, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. Well, you sneaky guy, you go for it.
I know. I also support as written with a preference for shall. What I would recommend, if we cannot adopt without changing it, even if that requires going back to staff, is that we adopt as written and immediately propose a new policy to change the should to shall subsequently.
Okay. Thank you. Center microphone. And then John Curran.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, ARIN AC. I'm going to be different. I support should or shall. I prefer should. And this is in a spirit of incrementalism. We need to move this forward. I'm not sure should means shall means you're going to do it all the time with the exceptions that are explicitly in the policy. If we make it shall, We need to make sure we have all the exceptions we want in the policy. Otherwise, John's going to make you do it. Should means, yeah, you're supposed to do this, and if you have a really, really good reason not to, John gets to consider that. And so if we want to make this if we want to make this shall, we need to make sure we have all of the exceptions everybody in the room wants. Otherwise, John's going to, come down on you. And that'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to close the microphones very shortly, so this is your last chance to get in, either to speak on the question that's been there, or we should probably talk about other things. So if there's anything else in the policy that you'd like to bring up, just let's not forget about the rest of the text. But again, I will be closing the microphones in about half a minute. So.
Oh, and DeLong again, Akamai ARIN AC. I wanted to rebut the idea that we care whether this is an editorial change or not. The standard for an editorial change is if the AC wants to change something in policy without really bringing it through the formal process, and it's usually used for cleanups of typos and grammatical errors and things like that, where it doesn't actually change the meaning of the policy, but it makes it either more clear or more correct, or simply adds a period that was missing or something like that. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a minor change to policy in last call. So minor, in fact, that it is a single word change. It is about as small and minor as a change to policy could possibly get. It is my opinion that the PDP allows the AC to make minor changes to policy between the meeting and last call in the case of a recommended draft policy, and that is what we should in fact do in this case, and I hope that we shall do it, but okay. I don't have the ability to dictate what the AC does. I believe John wants to rebut my comments after I'm done speaking.
I don't want to get too much into that. But I don't know if that really is cognate. This is just giving the input and then the question for the AC. The AC, I'm sure, can spend numerous hours today deciding whether or not they can and how that can be changed.
Okay. So having said that, I still support the policy as written and prefer shall as a minor change going forward. But I wanted to clarify that my understanding of the PDP process is we can make this minor change, not an editorial change, and that editorial is not the standard that applies here in this particular stage of the PDP. Thank you.
You may, just after I say the microphones are now closed, and I would ask all further commenters to keep their comment under 1 minute, starting with the next John Curran.
So, good news, folks. You can make minor or major changes to this policy and still send it to last call. The sentence that's operative in the policy development process is very simple. If the AC sends a recommended draft policy different than the one presented during the public policy consultation, i.e. the different than this, okay? Then the advisory council will provide a detailed explanation for all changes. We changed should to shall or shall to should. And all these specific changes must have been discussed during the community consultation, which we obviously have meant adequate discussion of this particular change. So whatever the AC comes out in that word is been covered by this discussion, and they can send it to last call. So not a problem.
So we won't get into discussion of that and say that yes, that you could see this policy adopted without another policy meeting with should or shall. Again, short please, far microphone please.
Christopher Regan, Bronx District Attorney's Office, law enforcement official. I support this policy. I support must, most, if not that, then shall, if not that, then should, with support of what David was saying, that I think that any sort of exceptions to this this policy, if anyone thinks there should be any, should be brought up before this this goes into effect.
Thank you. Center microphone.
David Williamson, Pinger. Actually, I have a slightly different question. Let me start by saying I support the policy as written. I'd prefer shall. But I want to note that PI space in V6, the minimum allocation is 48. which of course requires appropriate registration information. So why was 47 chosen when if you get a 48 in PA space, you should have similar obligations to someone who has a 48 out of PI space?
So generally, people aren't issued a /48 individually to then subdelegate down to somebody else. However, there are exceptions written in here that show that you would be responsible to register that block anyway.
Yeah, I just like the idea that there's some parity there. It's not important though. It's, I think, as written with shall would be perfect. So thank you.
Excellent. Michael, can I borrow you at the front for a second? Center microphone.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. I'm not going to get hung up on guilty or not guilty as whether it's minor or editorial. I have faith in the advisory council to deal with this and whatever it may be. My only caution is that change is change, and in this particular case, it is not an insubstantial change. I'm not saying it's substantial, but it's not insubstantial. And that's it. Good luck, everybody. You have your work cut out for you.
Thank you. Next microphone.
Brian Jones, Virginia Tech. Support the policy as written and also support shall.
Thank you. Far microphone.
Frank Balk, Premier Communications, FiberNet Communications. I support the policy and prefer shall. I think this aligns well with our current intents and practices and how we give address space.
Thank you. And the final comment.
Louis Lee, Vice Chair ASO Address Council, Google Fiber, a startup ISP.
A little scrappy upstart, right?
Scrappy. I prefer shall, but I would support also.
Thank you. So I believe that ends our queue, though I always just like to double check on remote participation because there's always a bit of lag, but I see none there. So we will thank our speaker. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Leif.
So this is the point, because it's a recommend draft policy, that we will take a poll of the room. The normal one would be for recommend draft policy would be, do you support moving the proposal forward as written? And that would be the standard question. However, we will be asking two questions at the request of the advisory council chair. So I just want to make that clear so you know what's coming up. And I would ask you to try and deal with them independently, is that we will ask whether or not you support the text as written on page 11 of your book. And then I will ask if you would support the proposal as written on page 11 with the word should replaced with shall. So we will do the first question. Ready? Everyone ready? So if you can hear my voice, if you are in this room or in remote, you are entitled to put your hand up for either nice and strong so our counters can count. I will first ask for those in favor and then against. So on question 1 of 2017-5, may I ask you to raise your hand if you are in support of this policy as written? Please raise your hand nice and high and keep it until I ask you to lower it. This is our little exercise break here. You shall keep your hand up until I ask you to lower it. Thank you. You should now lower it. And if you are opposed to the text as written, could you please raise your hand nice and high? And remote participation, you should be participating in the forum online right now. Okay. That ends question 1. So take a deep breath, get those hands ready. We are now going to ask a second question. I'll just wait for 1 second to make sure our counters are ready because I did throw them off with a second question. Okay, we're just going to wait. I think they just like to close that one out. So thanks again to staff for a lovely social last night. I'll give a round of hands to the staff for organizing. That was a great... Anytime there's a taco truck, that's good with me, I got to tell you. So one too many probably. So just another second. And then we are going to break little bit late. Just a little bit of delay. I apologize. We just have to make sure every hand is counted. Okay. Apologize for that delay. We are now going to ask our second and final question. So this is your last chance. On proposal 2017-5, I would ask those who are in favor of the policy as written, but amending the word should to shall in section 4 there. Please raise your hand nice and high and keep it until our trusty counters have. This is your moment. Please no hanging chads or one hand only. Please keep it up. I know. Okay, you are allowed to lower it now. And those opposed to moving this policy forward with the word change, please raise your hand now, nice and high. Give us a second as we survey the room. Are we good, official counters? Excellent. Okay. Any announcements you have that you can knock off while we wait for this tally, or we're going for break? There'll be probably some kind of calorie-free foods. You
No
unfortunately
hurry, Michael.
starve at ARIN meetings.
You're between these people and cookies.
I make it as a point never to be, but we should know the results before we go, and I shall have a cookie.
Actually, I'm guessing cookies. It could be anything out there. Any idea what's out there? We have cranberry?
Cranberry. Oh, we are there.
Okay. I noticed that one of the prosciutto and salami, that was
very tasty. All right, appreciate all your patience. Like I said, we did throw a little bit of a last-minute snag here, but the envelope is coming. I will try to read the correct one and not announce La La Land as the winner. All right, thank you, sir. Oh, these are new and big. They must think I'm getting old because the font on this is like 3 times the size it used to be. All right, on the question of recommended draft policy 2017-5, improved IPv6 requirements with the word shall. We had 125 participants in the room, 7 remotes. We had 56 in favor, 0 against. On the question with the word should, still 125 in the room, 7 remote, 47 in favor, 2 against. This input will be provided to the Advisory Council for further consideration, and I thank you. This ends our policy block. Thank you.